I'm excited to join this CXO Summit, where we're going to talk about some of the most interesting and timely topics about securing the enterprise, caring about the new corporate governance mission. I got two very distinguished IT leaders joining me for the panel. Without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. I'll have each of them briefly talk about their background and what they have been up to in dealing with some of these areas. Andy, why don't you start?
Sure thing, Jay. Welcome everybody to our afternoon session. I'm Andy Brown. I'm CEO of Santel East. I spent 30 years in enterprise technology across pharma, oil, telecom, and then 20 years in the financial services sector, finishing off at UBS for 3 years as group CTO. I've been running Santel East since 2013, and I've been working with Jay for 7 years at this point, first as an advisor and secondly as a board member. The thing I think that's really kind of top of mind for many people right now is, what they've changed during the last year and what changes have happened to them as a result of what has changed, and how much of that do they want to persist going forwards in the design of their new organizations, how the people interact with technology and how the people interact with each other. And security turns out to be a common topic amongst applications, people's devices, and even devices with no people like IoT. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion, and we'll get into the detail in a bit.
Thank you, Andy. Vish, your introduction, please.
Thank you, Jay, and thanks the Zscaler team for having me on. Really appreciate it, and really excited to be here. So I'm Vish Narendra, graphic packaging CIO. We're a paper packaging company, an integrated paper packaging company that produces paperboard rolls and folding carton and cups. Hopefully Andy is using a paper cup, and we made that. I've been with the company about 6 years. I've been in the technology field 25 plus years, some telecommunications consulting work, and then a long stint at General Electric, mostly in the power generation business, in the last 6 years at Graphic. I will tell you, in an era when our employees and our customers and everybody expects access to information and data anytime, anywhere, any place, keeping that enterprise secure in that context is the challenge of our lifetimes. And really, the time that I have spent even 3-4 years ago was around 5-7% thinking about cybersecurity. Now is more in the range of 30-40%. The threat landscape is just expanding nonstop, and COVID just simply accelerated that. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about all of those topics.
Wonderful. Vish, before I came across graphics packaging, I never knew how many of your products we touch. Just curious, can you tell the audience what are some of the key things you package? Paper cups is one of them.
Yeah, so we're an integrated paper packaging company, and we focus primarily on food and beverage. So I like to say we're in your pantry, your refrigerator, your freezer, all of the world's big consumer brands that you can think of are our customers: Kraft Heinz, Kellogg's, General Mills, Nestle on the food side, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, all of the big beer. So, as you know, for the first time in 7 or 8 years, big beer actually saw growth through COVID. And so last year was pretty busy for us. So we basically package what you eat and drink, and what you ate and drank was mostly at home, which was in some ways a good thing for us because we package a lot of that. To put it in context, we package maybe about 40% of the food in the US, about I'd say 50% roughly, give or take, on the beverage side, that goes in paper, not in plastic, but goes in paper packaging. And we produce about 30% of the paper cups in the US. So we're a large part of the food and beverage economy in the United States, but we also have a global presence. We're in Western Europe, modest presence in Australia, New Zealand.
One, just a little bit on the size. Your revenue, number of employees, number of countries you are in, that also tells how big of an IT infrastructure you have to manage.
Yeah, we're a $6.5 billion revenue company. Expect to be about give or take $7 billion this year. We're in, like I said, in North America, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, small presence in China, Japan, and Brazil. We are where our customers want us to be, we have about 19,000 employees worldwide. Obviously some in offices where I go to, but a lot of them in production facilities, paper mills, converting plants. Our footprint, we've got a couple of data centers, one here in the US, one in Europe, transitioning a lot of workload into the cloud environment. We manage about a petabyte of data across our environment.
Wow, impressive. Let's get into some of the questions. Andy, you talk about impact of COVID. Well, how can there be any conversation without impact of COVID in today's life? Let me ask a simple question. I hear about two big impacts, acceleration being one, change of mindset being two. Which one of you do you think is the bigger impact and why?
Well, I think actually this is a good timing question, because if you think about trends accelerate when there is a massive change in people's lives. And I used the analogy in the meeting earlier about war and radar and encryption in World War II. But I think the acceleration that's happened was a trend that was already happening anyway, both with regard to cloud, with regard to hybrid work, with regard to work as a service. So you've seen companies like ServiceNow grow dramatically prior to COVID, and now they've grown even more because the need to manage work into people's inboxes and out of people's inboxes, or even into ServiceNow queues, has changed the way a lot of work works. And digitization of what people do and the introduction actually of more machine learning and AI during COVID to solve specific problems has been a theme. So I think the acceleration is what's happened first. What happens second is the farming of the things that you discovered and the determination of which things are valid to stay. And I think that the most important learning appears to be right now that hybrid work is something that workers want. And so, whether it's working at home 1 day a week, 5 days a week, 3 days a week, the ability to be free to choose where you live. I mean, there's a whole bunch of topics that have come out of the last year that are going to influence, I think, our medium to long-term strategy for talent management, for security, for internet connectivity, and so on. So it seems like many of these kind of things, like the Elon Musk Starlink thing, for example, have come at just the right time to enable digital workers to now live in places that they couldn't live before. So I think there's a convergence of things that will turn into the set of items that you farm out from the last year and decide to leverage.
Makes sense. Vish, how has the role of IT and the role of CIOs changed? I hear so many things where the CEO and the senior management suddenly start to appreciate the role of IT being far more important than they thought before.
Yeah, it's so true. And I've got a real life anecdote to kind of illustrate that. And I think our CEO certainly understood and appreciated all the investment that we were making. But there's always this question of, do I invest that for growth and buy new equipment or hire more people, or do I give it to IT to go transform the business? And COVID happened, and we went to remote work, and it became sort of seamless, transition. We were not preparing for COVID, but we were ready for it. And so, I actually got a call one day, like 5 or 6 weeks after we went remote, things were working okay, nothing fell apart. And the CEO said, I certainly appreciate all of the investment that we're making. Now I know that it's real. And what that really has meant is that CEOs now see this as more of a competitive advantage, right? The transition to that hybrid work environment, where you in the past you could just walk over to somebody's office and say, hey, can you get that? Can you press the approve button for me? And you can't really do that anymore, or you can, but in a limited fashion. And so, service enabling that workflow has become critical. And so it's just the way that we're going to be doing work in the future. So I think CEOs understand that. Our CEO has been very supportive of all of the investments that we've been making. And we started our transformation journey well before COVID. It just has been accelerated now through the COVID scenario.
Right. I have seen, I've been hearing zero trust becoming a bigger priority during this time frame. Andy, what do you think about, how do you look at zero trust to start with? It kind of seems to have become a buzzword. People have different interpretation of it. How do you look at it, and why do you think it's becoming far more important than it has been?
Well, I think that the traditional methods of defending your franchise, whether that be multi-vendor products in a DMZ, or 5 different products on an endpoint, or whatever it is, have actually not succeeded in necessarily blocking all of the inbound attack vectors that are coming at an enterprise. So I think this notion that nothing should be trusted unless it's verified is super important. I think identity sits at the center of this, and validation of identity, being certain that the person and the device is who they say they are or what they say they are, is at the center of the elimination of many different kinds of fraud. And cybersecurity is often, the counterpoint, if you will, the enabler, if you like, to fraud occurring. So I think identity and policy are the two key things that you want to be able to manage consistently globally, but not necessarily the same in each country, because there are different legal requirements, for example, in each country. So I think when people try to wrap their head around what zero trust is a philosophy, first of all. It's a philosophy of forcing identification and verification of everything. And whether that's an app talking to an app, a person talking to an app, a person talking to a person, even, or a person sending a wire, in all of those cases, zero trust has applicability. I think one of the misnomers in the world right now is that you can buy zero trust. What you can buy are parts of a zero trust solution that work really well in the network layer, in the network and security layer, for end users, for end user access to applications. But that philosophy needs to actually persist all the way up to business processes. Is this business partner that's sending you something who they say they are? That's an important thing at the business process level too. So I'll stop there maybe, and you can open that up a bit broader.
I think it's good. But so the way we talked about before was zero trust says, it starts from zero trust network access. Don't trust people putting on the network. The traditional security has been castle and moat. There was identity before. Identity said, you're good. You got in the castle. You're home free to run around. So identity alone, combined with the castle and moat model, doesn't help. But if you treat everyone as untrusted, and the policy engine kind of says, can you go where you need to go or not? And you go to a specific application or service, not to the network. I think that's helping enterprises, because if you get compromised, the bad malware can spread left and right, laterally, so to speak. Vish, what have you done in this area?
Well, so I think about it as, we're in sort of Gen 2 of cybersecurity, right? Gen 1 was what you said, the castle and moat approach, harden the perimeter, put, guards at the watchtower, do all of those things. Well, we work and Starbucks happened and people were outside the perimeter and doing some work. And then COVID happened and people were at home and doing work. And so, what happens is your perimeter expands, all your standard controls get bypassed. And so then, your dispersed architecture, has forced a shift in security design. And, that's why you need zero trust. It's essentially, I want to know who you are, what device you're using, and what you have entitlement in terms of access to. Those are the three critical things. If I don't know those things, I'm not going to let you touch anything. And so that's really the focus that we've been taking. You know, we've even gone to the board and said, look, we're transitioning to a zero trust model where I want to verify who you are, what you have access to, and what device you're using. And if I can't figure out one of those things, I'm not giving you access anymore. So we've taken a lot of steps in that direction.
That's good. So that's validation of the person, device, and whatnot. But then there's a policy engine that's setting in line. Can you go to a service or not? I would like to compare it to an international airport. When you go in and out of the country, they check your boarding pass, they check your passport, they check your visa, and they check your luggage. But airport authorities are sitting in line to make sure you actually go to where you need to go to. So that's a policy engine part. So identity is important, but a policy engine that's sitting in line, enforcing the policy to make sure you connect to the right application or right service is equally important. The two together actually make it happen.
Yeah, no question. No question.
Right. So Andy, let me move on to the next area. All this zero trust and all is becoming more important as we're seeing more and more threats out there. I thought things were calming down. Then in November, December, we saw the SolarWinds thing. Wow, the whole supply chain. Some 18,000 plus organizations downloaded that compromised version. And then we saw things slowing down. Then Microsoft Exchange came on top of that. Wow. So how do you think about cyber threats now, and Andy, also as being a board member of a number of public companies? How is the board thinking about it? How is the board, and what's the board expecting from CEOs and CIOs?
Well, I think that most boards now understand that there are many Achilles heels in legacy infrastructure. And a way I describe it is to think about an iceberg and think about the part you can see and the part that you can't see. And the part you can't see is often the sometimes hundreds of security people running large parts of legacy infrastructure. And that legacy infrastructure served a purpose at the time when it was deployed, but now could probably be replaced by something more effective. So you can retarget those resources further up the stack. Specifically around this particular kind of attack, I think that the emphasis in COVID anyway on supply chain has been huge. You know, these companies that sell supply chain data, supply chain analytics, like Kinaxis and others, have done extraordinarily well because a lot of people didn't really understand their entire supply chain before. And now they're not only kind of reshoring parts of their supply chain, but they're also looking at multi-sourcing on the supply chain too. Now, when you think about that, you have to trust your partners as well in that situation. And often the way you're connected to them allows things that you wouldn't otherwise allow into your network. So I think a lot of people were able to survive SolarWinds, not you know, more by you know, not necessarily having the most exposed part of their infrastructure you know, able to be attacked, but a lot of people weren't as well. But I do think it's forcing much more introspection around integration points, basically, between you and your suppliers, and actually you and your distributors too. As the downstream part is equally important. So that's mainly what I've seen.
Vish, how has your interaction with your board changed in the recent times?
Yeah, so it's been in the news, so I can kind of talk about it. Our biggest competitor had a big attack earlier this year. Some of our customers have had a big attack that has crippled operations. So it's a really, an urgent board topic. Discussion is centered around, so where do we think we stand relative to, what has happened at some of these other places, as well as, I think there is this feeling of almost, hey, if this is just a matter of time before we have some sort of impact. So if it does happen, well, how do we respond? So I think focus in the past was primarily around, hey, what are you doing to keep us safe? And I think on top of that, our board is also asking, I know you're doing everything in your power to keep us safe, but if something does happen, then how do we respond? How do we react? And so, I think for all companies, dusting up your business continuity plan, understanding your disaster recovery plan, all of those are critical topics, and those are areas of interest for our board.
That's right. Now, as your employees are working from anywhere and everywhere, Vish, how do you ensure they can securely access those applications? What have you done from technology point of view or education or process point of view?
I'll start with the education piece. We're spending time. It's mandatory awareness training that everybody goes through. I push continuously every operating leader to spend a security minute, like they do a safety minute, and some have done it, sporadically, but it's going to become more and more of an obvious practice. Just like safety is a critical component, keeping the company safe is critical as well. So I think we'll do some of that. We've got a lot of tools in place. We've deployed ZIA and ZPA, and that's allowed us to let our workers work from anywhere. So you've got, as we've talked about how, the network has evolved, and your corporate network is now, predominantly on the internet, keeping the employees' devices safe, keeping the employees safe is critical. So ZIA and ZPA have been a big portion of that. We've got a plethora of other technologies that we've deployed as well, but those are the two critical pieces. You talked about not having broad network access and only letting people go to where they need to go. ZPA allows us to do that. We've got a couple other things that are in the hopper, but essentially that's how we've been thinking about it and deploying.
Thank you. Just to clarify, ZIA, Zscaler Internet Access, our platform service that allow you to safely get to internet or SaaS application safely from no matter where you are. And ZPA, Zscaler Private Access, where you can access your private or internal applications without being on the network, without having to need VP and the like. So that's really helped you. That's a policy engine that works in conjunction with identity to implement zero trust. Now, the other point you mentioned was not being on the network and internet becoming your corporate network. It's kind of fascinating. There's a lot of inertia around it. CIOs and CTO used to think that they could not run their business without their massive wide area network. But COVID showed them that they could. I was talking to the CIO of a very large system integrators. He said, I learned during COVID that I don't need to transform my network. I need to eliminate my network because internet is already there. It's like if you got a highway system in the US available for you, would you build your private roads? The private network is just like those roads. So I'm hearing from CIOs that they can actually take some of the money from old technologies and actually apply it to modernize some of the old infrastructure and applications. Andy, what are you hearing in the transformation area? Where is the budget coming from? There's a lot of cost pressure that CIOs, CTOs have.
Agreed. I think that the point you made is right. I think that the hub and spoke models of MPLS are being replaced by models with direct internet connectivity. And not only is that providing the centralized policy management to allow branch applications to access apps either on-prem or in the cloud, but it's also giving much better performance. People really underestimate the cost of latency in delivering really good SLAs to applications. And what we've seen in large clients that have adopted, and even in large banks that have adopted in the last year or two, is there's been a significant benefit in doing that. And for some application types, like training classes, for example, for Series 7 or something like that in financial services, all of those classes are now done online on video using 4K video, which really doesn't work well over MPLS with backhaul. So there's a whole bunch of capability that you're unleashing for the business, as well as a better architecture for your future as well. So I think it's a really big deal, this network architecture. The final thing I'd say is that when you're trying to build for cloud, and you're trying to build a hybrid cloud and a hybrid work solution, you really want flexibility at the network layer to allow you the best possible path for connectivity, thinking that, at any given point, an application could be on-prem or it could be in the cloud. So I think it just gives you a lot more agility as well.
So really what I'm hearing is, with zero trust, you can actually decouple application access from network access. Network essentially becomes a transport. It becomes plumbing. You no longer have to keep on working on the network if you move applications around. That becomes wonderful. And as network changes, in fact, tomorrow, you may want to use 5G. It shouldn't really matter. You shouldn't have to do anything about it. Those are some of the wonderful things. Let's have a poll about some of the priorities our audience has about secure application access today. There are many approaches. In the past, companies depended upon being on the corporate network by being physically in the office or by doing a VPN. So you got a few choices. Let's do multiple choices. And in about 10 seconds, we should be able to share the results of the survey with you. All right, let's see, the results are coming. VPN being one, lateral movement is an important area, zero trust, OT, industrial system, and the like. Julia, are we ready to share the results? All right, let's see. Moving away from VPN, whopping 73%. So that's the number one. Implementing zero trust for all users on net or off net. That's right behind that. I guess the two are kind of opposite of each other, so that's expected. And there's some B2B focus, and lateral movement is an important area as well. That's great. We got lots of topics to cover, but let's move on to some other areas. Let me ask you this question. Vish, what keeps you awake at night as the CIO?
My end users. I just feel like at this point in time, we've thrown all the tools and technologies that we can possibly think of to keep the environment safe. Anybody can get social engineered at any point in time. Business email compromise can happen. Spear phishing can happen. And just keep, as long as my end users are vigilant, I'll sleep a little better. But I think that's the piece that really keeps me up at night. If somebody, it even goes to company policy, for example, on should we allow personal email access, Yahoo Mail, Gmail, etc., on corporate devices. Because you're at home, you're on your corporate device and you're accessing Yahoo email, and that's compromised for some reason. Your device gets compromised. That could inject some malware into your environment potentially, and cause all kinds of issues. Or they could then latch on to corporate email and just be sniffing and listening and watching, and you could have trade secrets revealed. So these are the kinds of things that really we have to be thinking about. So really just educating the end user is what's going to let me sleep a little better at night, I think.
I agree, though I would say we can never train users enough because the bad guy is getting very, very sophisticated, right? Yeah. So we also hear about the need to do better segmentation. I mean, I hear two things: not putting people on the network. Two, whatever area they get to, if they can't have big lateral movement because you can do segmentation of applications and the like, that's a good thing. Are you looking at segmentation to minimize the lateral movement?
Absolutely. I think, microsegmentation is something that we've talked about with my CTO and my CISO. It's something that we really do need to get done, both on the corporate network side and on the OT network side. That's an area that we need to address in short order, no question.
Good.
I think we sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to finish that up by saying, if there is any sort of compromise at all, in spite of all the things that we've done, you want that compromise to be very limited. And I think microsegmentation is what's going to, get you there.
Okay, good. There's a question from the audience. That's good. I see a few questions coming. Andy, maybe you can take it. How do you measure the impact of cybersecurity from COVID-19? Measure is the key word.
Well, I think that the important thing to do is to look at, first of all, the level of attacks during COVID-19 and the attack vector and the risk surface area. And I know that Deepan will actually show some of that in his presentation a little later on. Suffice to say for now, the number of attacks has increased significantly. The type of attacks have increased significantly. The specialization of attacks around phishing, around vaccinations, around testing, using people's fear as a mechanism for getting them to click is a change as well. So I think that the level of attack has clearly increased and the specialization of attack has clearly increased. I think, though, that the advantage of a platform like Zscaler is that you get very, very early visibility to that. As soon as it shows up in one customer, you're able to see it and you're able to block it across all customers fairly quickly. So I think that that kind of attack is much less concerning than the Microsoft Exchange or the SolarWinds, which is more systemic. The other point I'd make is that I think zero trust also applies to insiders as well, and the trust and verify, identify, trust and verify model is equally important for internal employees as it is for external customers of your websites or people who are just sending you email. And I think that people's level of rigor around how they deal with insiders has also changed during COVID as a result of some of the things that have happened.
Yes, I'd like to say that if you really do zero trust, you're no insiders. Every employee is untrusted, every customer is untrusted. There's no difference between an employee and a customer. Now, from home, it's easy to say because both are sitting out there. And I think when your employees get back to the office, traditionally they are on your corporate network. And your corporate network is connected to your data center. Your applications and your users are on the same network. There's nothing more dangerous than doing that kind of stuff. So for that,
you and I have seen companies with completely flat networks get infected in one point and then literally just spread across the whole company. And so the micro segmentation that Vish just talked about doesn't exist anywhere in the network, even between user segments and data centers. Exactly.
I would say that there's a fascinating article anyone in IT leadership or security should read about. This was what Maersk, the mega shipping company. Maybe Kavita or Julia, you can put the link on the chat box. If you search NotPetya, Maersk, and Wired magazine on Google, it'll come up as the first search, the untold story. It actually tells you how this flat network can cause such a big damage out there. So good to eliminate that. There's another question from the audience. Oh, sorry, I answered that. We just answered part of it. How do you implement zero trust inside the network? So expanding a little bit on that. The zero trust says you are outsiders, you are untrusted, you go through an exchange, call it a switchboard, and then you connect to a particular application. Now, when you get on the network, what we had to do, this question was asked to Zscaler very early on after we released Zscaler Private Access. Answer was, the switchboard that's sitting in the cloud could that be made available to run in your data center on a virtual machine? Took us about 18 months to do that. And actually that functionality is available. So people sitting on your network who are supposedly insiders, they don't get access to any application unless they go through our switchboard, our exchange, which actually implements zero trust. So great. I know we're getting close to the end of time. I have one other question that came in. What are 2 or 3 things you recommend to consider implementing zero trust philosophy? I have already laid out the roadmap, done the awareness and education campaign with senior management and our board. Vish, what would you do? What are 2 or 3 recommendations?
You know, the first one that kind of comes to mind, Jay, you and I have talked about this in the past, is, you know, you put ZPA in and you take out VPN,
Yep.
you actually get phone calls from people and say, wow, thank you. And when does that ever happen? You know, I think people are just used to pulling out a token and putting in the code and doing, you know, 2-factor or whatever. And so I think start small, set some boundaries around some proof of concepts or whatever, deploy ZIA or deploy ZPA, depending on your environment or circumstance, get some quick wins. Use that win to get some advocates and ambassadors that you can then use to amplify the message within the environment. And you're going to go very quickly, very fast. And then the second thing I'd say is, when you're implementing, you're going to run into some roadblocks, some issues, someplace, because some DLL conflict with ZIA, something happened, and you know you need to create an exclusion. Well, don't be too rigid. If necessary, create the exclusion for a short period of time, you know, a defined period, and keep business moving. But then go do the investigation to figure out what the issue is. You may need to do an upgrade on your app or do something else. You get that done, and then you put them back. And so you've now averted sort of this PR disaster, but at the same time, you know, you've gotten, you know, kept the company safe. So I'd say go fast, take small pieces, go fast, get some wins, publicize, then move even faster, and then be a little bit more flexible in your approach, and you'll succeed.
That's a very pragmatic advice. Andy, your thought?
I would add just 2 things. One of them is have a really good understanding of your cost. So there is a massive cost takeout opportunity if you do this the right way. We talked about the difference between MPLS networks, for example, and branch-based internet connectivity. So just having a good view of that makes it much easier to communicate in the language of the business to the business what the benefit's going to be from a cost perspective. And the second thing I'd say is that in the world we're moving into, where digital is the flavor of the decade, basically, your ability to be agile and drive change faster is very important. And a lot of people underestimate how important the simplicity of Zscaler's architecture is to the future of being able to drive change. If you just think about changing one firewall rule in a DMZ that's replicated in 10 locations and now has to go through Radware and 10 other vendors, and just coordinating all of that versus making the change in one place and the policy change and being able to implement it, there's a real change velocity that you can unleash once you get this architecture done right. And I think that's a massive top line benefit for the business because it allows them to innovate faster. So
great.
Yeah, I just maybe I'm going to add one thing really quick, Jay, to what Andy just said on the cost piece. And there's so much truth to that. I think we sort of self-funded a lot of this effort in some ways. And so for companies like us, which have a bit of a legacy environment, legacy infrastructure, we needed to get to a 2-step thing of going to making the internet our network, right? We still have locations. So we went to SD-WAN. SD-WAN allowed us to do a first step cost takeout. And then the minute that we can transition all of our workloads completely to a cloud environment, whether it's Azure or AWS, whatever it is, then the internet becomes your network and you have the second version of your cost takeout. So these are things that can fund your effort pretty seamlessly.
Excellent. We are out of time, but let's see the few more questions. There's a question about OT in manufacturing. I would say that more and more companies have already done zero trust in the enterprise are moving to really handle the same zero trust and IoT OT. We'll take it offline in the interest of time. I do want one last piece of advice from each of the panelists. If you could keep your answer short, but just one last piece of advice you have for fellow CIOs, what would that be? Give us a 45 to 60-second answer. Vish.
Maybe I'll let Andy go first, so I can think about my answer.
Sure. I think we talked before about kind of the business case piece of this. Start off in IT. Just start off in IT. It's easy enough to start with a small audience. The IT organization will be very pleased that you did, and you can grow things from a fairly small starting point without having to do the whole business case up front. So that's another piece of advice I would hand.
Good. Vish, one piece of advice.
Yeah. I'd say, just because you're doing security doesn't mean that you have to put all these hurdles, in front of people. And so I'd say, simplification of the environment is a byproduct of putting in, a solution like Zscaler, right? And so don't hesitate to take that step because you think you're gonna make it difficult for your employees. You're actually going to simplify their lives and use that as the tip of the spear to drive the change that's required.
Very practical. Andy and Vish, thank you so much for your time and participation.